Hello, and welcome to Science with Mr. Morgan. In today's episode, we will start our conversation about reproductive behaviors and population growth. Starting off, let's talk about reproductive behaviors. By definition, these are behaviors or activities that are directed towards the perpetuation of a species. Essentially, these are behaviors or activities that help with producing more offspring. These behaviors are going to vary depending on the organisms that are being discussed. To start, let's look at reproductive behaviors in animals. The first one that we're going to look at is mating. Mating involves the pairing of an adult male and adult female to produce young or offspring. Adults that are most successful at attracting a mate are most likely to have offspring. Now remember, most animals reproduce sexually, so if they're unable to attract a mate, they are unable to reproduce. There are certain traits that help animals attract mates, which increases their fitness. And when I'm referring to fitness, am I referring to the animals working out? Nope. Fitness, in this sense, is referring to how well adapted an animal is. The more fit they are, the more likely they are able to reproduce, pass on their genes, and improve the survival of their entire species. Anyways, back to those traits that increase the animal's fitness. The genes for these traits get passed on to the next generation and will become more common in the population, which means that more and more of the offspring of this species will show these particular traits. The next reproductive behavior we're going to look at is courtship. You might have heard the term courting someone in older movies, which essentially means taking the other person out on dates. Animals do this as well, albeit in a different capacity than humans. They're not taking each other out on dates, or at least not that I'm aware of. In many species, females choose the male that they will mate with. And because of this, males try and become the chosen mate by showing the female that they would be a better mate than other males. The way that they display these are via courtship behaviors. So what exactly are courtship behaviors? As I've alluded to, these are special behaviors to help attract a mate. In the animal world, these are often observed as direct competition between males. Examples of this include the following. A male peacock raising his tail feathers in the presence of a female peacock. He's trying to impress the female peacock with the beauty of his feathers, so the more elaborate the design, or the more vibrant the colors, the more likely that female peacock will be impressed and want to mate with that male peacock. Another example is a lyrebird singing complex songs. Lyrebirds use the sounds that they hear to create a unique and complicated song. The more complicated the song, the more likely they are to impress a female lyrebird. To make these very complicated, they use sounds that seem out of the ordinary for birds to make. These can include things like chainsaws, camera clicks, or even car alarms, as well as other bird noises. Speaking of other birds, another bird by the name of a blue-footed booby creates an elaborate dance to attract mates. Whales sing special mating songs to attract their mate. Frogs use croaks and croaking various songs to attract their mates. Male deer and reindeer, or moose, fight one another, clashing their antlers. Sometimes they can get stuck together if their antlers get caught. Male spiders jump side to side in an elaborate pattern to impress a female. Now, that was a lot of examples. And now that we've covered them, let's look at the next reproductive behavior, which is caring for the young. In most species of bird and mammals, one or both of the parents care for the offspring, and this is done in a variety of ways. One way is making a nest or shelter to protect their offspring when they are very vulnerable, when they're very young, very early on. Another way is feeding the young and protecting them from predators. This protection can be done by physically protecting the offspring from predators or by creating a distraction that draws the predator away from the young. An example of this is seen in killdeer. Killdeer are birds that pretend to have a broken wing while hopping away from the nest. The predators think that the injured killdeer will be easy prey, so it goes after them. Once the killdeer is far enough away from their nest, they fly away from the predator. Another way that parents care for their offspring is by teaching important skills which help ensure survival. An example of this is seen with meerkats. Meerkats teach their young how to eat scorpions. This is done in a very specific manner so that they don't die from a sting while they are eating the poisonous scorpions. Now, compared to other types of animals, birds and mammals have relatively few offspring, which is why these behaviors are so important. Fewer offspring means that more need to survive to ensure the survival of the species. Anyways, the next reproductive behavior we're going to talk about is defending territory. Some species are territorial, which means that they defend their area that has their nest and food for them or for their offspring. Animals are more likely to be territorial if food is scarce. Rather than fighting, animals generally defend their territory through display behaviors. And this display behavior tells others to stay away, and it is generally safer for the animal. It also uses less energy than fighting. Less energy, less likely to be injured or die. Better route for them. Display behaviors can be physical or chemical. Physical behavior examples include gorillas thumping on their chest or robins displaying their red breast. Chemical behavior examples include things like animals marking their boundary of their territory with urine, or cats rubbing their faces on objects to deposit chemicals. That way, when other animals smell those chemicals, they know that that territory or item belongs to that animal. Now, before we spend time talking about reproductive behaviors in plants, we're going to spend time talking about populations. So to start, let's look at what population size is. But before that, what is a population? By definition, a population is all of the organisms of the same species that live in the same area. Populations usually grow when they have everything they need. Now, what do I mean by that? These things include, but are not limited to, plenty of food and resources, an adequate number of mates, and successful mating rituals. How fast a population is growing is known as the population growth rate. This equals the number of new members added to the population in a year for every 100 members already in the population, and can be represented with a formula R equals B minus D. In this formula, R is equal to the growth rate. B is equal to the birth rate, which is the number of births in 1 year per 100 population members. D is equal to the death rate, which is the number of deaths in 1 year per 100 population members. If R, the growth rate, is positive, then the population is growing bigger. But if R, the growth rate, is negative, then the population is getting smaller. This means that more people are dying than being born. Eventually, the population will reach what is called the carrying capacity. This is the maximum population which can be supported by the environment with things like amount of food available, area for a species to live, that type of thing. The closer a population gets to its carrying capacity, the slower the population will grow. Just like with other animals and plants, human population has varied, and throughout history there have been revolutions in population growth. These revolutions are not the same as something like the Revolutionary War. Instead, it is referring to a time when the human population grew rapidly at different points within our history. The first one that we're going to talk about today is the agricultural revolution. Agriculture, by definition, involves farming, and farming was developed about 10,000 years ago. This created a steady supply of food and allowed people to settle in villages instead of relying as heavily on hunting and gathering. Flash forward a little bit. Human population ended up spiking around 1800 BCE, which stands for Before Common Era. And this was due to increased farming and the rise of cities and towns, which in turn then led to a population which steadily increased until 1800 CE, which stands for Common Era. There was another population spike around 1800 CE, like I just mentioned, and that was during the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution began in the late 1700s in Europe, North America, and a few other places. During the Industrial Revolution, the source of power to complete work changed from people, like us, to machines and fossil fuels. These changes ended up allowing more work to be done, therefore, more food could be grown, which caused more people to move into cities. The birth rate at this point remained high and constant, but the reason population grew is because the death rate fell significantly, so you had more people being born than there were dying. New farm machines were invented, which further increased the amount of food that could be grown. Steam engines and railroads became more common, which quickly carried food long distances and decreased food shortages. Sanitation also improved. Sewers were dug that allowed human waste to be carried away, which helped decrease the amount of disease that was spread. Now, after the Industrial Revolution came the Green Revolution, which was another improvement in agriculture, just like the original agricultural revolution we just talked about. The Green Revolution began in the mid-1900s, which was after World War II. And in this revolution, new methods of farming were formed and products increased with how much food could be produced. One way that this was done was through genetic manipulation. Farmers did what was called selective breeding. And what they did was they selectively bred for certain ideal genetic traits which would help grow the best crops. They also used genetic modification for this. Another way is through the increased use of artificial fertilizers and chemical pesticides. This ended up helping keep pests at bay and allowed the plants to grow better and produce more. Also during this time, agricultural machinery itself got a boost in usage and efficiency, which led to a boost in usage and efficiency of plowing, tilling, fertilizing, picking, and transporting. There was also increased access to water, which allowed crops to be grown that may have struggled more in that area previously. If we looked at some statistics, a century ago or 100 years ago, one farmer produced enough food for 2.5 people. But now, after the Green Revolution, one farmer can feed more than 130 people. It's because of this that the Green Revolution itself is credited for feeding 1 billion people that would not otherwise have been able to survive because the food wasn't there. And the last revolution that we're going to talk about today is the health revolution. Healthcare has significantly improved over the most recent centuries, which has allowed more people to live longer than they had before. One of the ways that this happened is through vaccines. Vaccines were developed which helped to prevent many diseases, and we also have antibiotics that were discovered which could cure most infections caused by bacteria. Now I know that that was a lot of information at once, so that brings us to the end of today's lesson. We will finish this conversation in part 2. Until next time,